Good morning, friends. It is indeed morning, about 10 after 5, I think. And I'm launching into this year's OBEJournal 2018. It's been a year since we've met this way, although there's been lots of interim interaction under another rubric title. It had been obvious to me that we'd be getting to this fairly soon, but I got preoccupied with more mundane practical tasks. And it has not been given to me by my greater self or astral self, whatever you might like to call it, my wider consciousness, what this particular series will be focused on, if indeed it's focused on anything other than exploration. And so I may look like I'm in the driver's seat, but I'm actually in the passenger seat. And we'll be intrigued to find out how the process unfolds. And stop number one on this journey seems to be, so far, an interaction with the English folk singer from the 1970s. She's passed on since then, late 70s, Sandy Denny. And always been a fan of her music and her singing of both traditional ballads and songs of her own composition. And in her joined groups like Fairport Convention, formed one called Fotheringay, and made several albums under her own name, and was part of a wave of I would say British and American musicians who sought to enliven or bring up to date, shall we say, to electric instruments and the general rock sensibility, the traditional songs and ballads of both Britain, Scotland, Ireland, France, and North America. And the movement tended to be called folk rock at the time, although it seemed like everybody quibbled with the nomenclature. Nobody wanted to be called this, that, or the other. They just wanted it to be music. But music journalism is such that they need categories to put things in order to talk about them. And that is how it came to be known, and it's still continued today, where people sing in a sort of a folky style, but often have electric guitars, drums, bass, keyboards, as opposed to the very traditional style of one person standing up and singing a ballad, perhaps sometimes accompanied by a fiddle, sometimes not, or a banjo. So I was reading very recently, in fact still reading it now, a biography of Sandy Denny called I've Always Kept a Unicorn, by Mick Houghton, and just finding out how her life unfolded. And she died quite young, late 70s, and left a husband and a child. It seemed very sad at the time, and I always continued to enjoy music at a time when all you could do was listen to it on records. And now, of course, we have all kinds of CD reissues, box sets, videos, all sorts of things, as is common in the digital age. So just a natural interest. And you've noticed in other spirit contacts and OBEJournal entries from last year that I've retained an interest in many of the cultural figures that I admired, respected, studied, enjoyed as they passed on. And it seems to generate interest. Celebrities, and I wouldn't say Sandy was a great celebrity, but certainly had a cult following and still does, and is admired by many, still admired by many prominent figures in the rock world, like Robert Plant and Pete Townsend, just to mention two. Many others, and is considered along on the same level as people like Joan Baez and Judy Collins and Joni Mitchell, but certainly lesser known, there's no question. And her song "Who Knows Where the Time Goes" has become considered a modern classic. Many people have covered it, and that alone, I think, would keep her name mentioned in the musical dictionaries of the age. So woke up this morning, one of her songs, the Fotheringay version of Banks of the Nile, was going through my head, as it sometimes does, but it really was this morning, and I thought, why is that? And it occurred to me that I had visited her during the night and that I should talk about it. Some people email me and ask why I do such things, why one would want to do such things. And some are just interested in why one would do it at all. Others are interested in why would go beyond one's family and friends. And I would just say curiosity, a keenness to see what people you care for are up to. I didn't have a sense that she wasn't okay. She's been past many years now and has had certainly plenty of opportunity to reform those elements in her character, which I think brought her down, gave her great difficulty. Like many people in her time period and world, the entertainment world, she overindulged in alcohol and drugs. And gave herself problems from that. Perhaps they were self-medicating in a sense of coping with depression and loneliness. People who go on tour a lot feel a loneliness, traveling around all the time and living in hotel rooms, perhaps not as glamorous as those of us who stay at home might think. And I think it's exacerbated by the drugs and the alcohol, rather than cured. You pay a price, and yes, we pay a price for anything that we do, don't we? And so I mean that's why I do it. Aside from the overarching purpose of doing my part, my very small part, in joining up the two worlds, the spirit world and the physical world, and showing that they can be one, and that they will be one, as we plod along bit by bit, sewing up that tear in the fabric of consciousness that we created when we decided to create the physical plane thousands of years ago, and created at such a low level of density and vibration that we would lose our spiritual consciousness, or most of it, while we were here. And so we're reascending the ladder that we descended, if I can use that metaphor. Um, so for those of you who wonder, and some of you may be fairly new to these videos and have not seen the 44 that I did last year, 2017, which a lot of these themes were explored in detail. And for those of you that have seen them, thank you for coming by and coming back. And we'll see what happens with this series. As I say, I may look like I'm in the driver's seat, but I'm really sitting in the back seat getting notes from the driver in front. And many of you are still asking from time to time how one transfers one consciousness to the spirit world. And there's a whole number of techniques and answers to that. And I'm at the stage where I either recall having transferred to the other world while asleep, or I actively do it while on camera. This one is a recall. I see myself sitting with Sandy. I must have made a fairly quick transfer some hours ago. And where are we sitting? I think it's the cottage of a garden. Did I just say cottage of a garden? Excuse me. It's a little early in the morning. Garden of a cottage. She was she was an urban person and liked the excitement of the city, but I believe she also spent a number of years near a village in Northamptonshire in England and developed a greater love for the country too. So she seems to be in a garden in a cottage in astral plane, England. And she's quite charmed that I've come to see her. I basically just walked up to the door and knocked on it and explained who I was. And she's reacted by saying, "Not very few people from Earth come to see me." She was really quite charmed and invited me to sit down in the garden by a sort of a picnic table, and was quite willing to chat away. And the talk ranged from her initial shock and depression at having died so young, and not being able to fully pursue her various musicianly ambitions. She certainly had more that she wanted to accomplish, and felt that she had ruined her chances by her own foolishness. I believe there was a fall down a set of stairs and a head injury that wasn't attended to properly, I believe. I don't know the details because I haven't got to that part of the book, but definitely a fall down a set of stairs. And alcohol was involved, no question. So a period of self-punishment while she was initially there, and missing of her child, of course, and her husband. Trevor Lucas, an Australian musician who had come to London to make his fortune there, and a good sort of guitarist, singer, producer in his own right, over and above his association with Sandy. and he was a part of the groups Fotheringay and Fairport Convention at various times, and you can still see him singing on various videos. So a not unusual transition in terms of that generation and that generation's lifestyle, those entertainers. We could go on for ages about the number of rock musicians that passed through carelessness due to drug and alcohol consumption. Sandy was certainly not as wildly famous as Jimi Hendrix and Jim Morrison. At the same time, well loved amongst her contemporaries and her fans of the day. She's saying, it tells me, I got myself together eventually. Took a while, she said, and people looked after me while I regained my strength, she said. And eventually I got settled and began singing again. And of course there's that marvelous discovery that there is an entire world up here, and that life can continue in all the ways, many of the ways that you hoped it would continue. Hoped but wondered about. And she said it wasn't long before I was singing again, and I started by singing to small groups in astral plane cafes and our astral plane version of coffee houses where folk music was played. And I was quite delighted by this. And soon, how did she say, took up my old life. Although she said I didn't, the stress was not there. The loneliness wasn't there. There wasn't the traveling. There wasn't the sitting in hotel rooms by yourself. Trevor wasn't with me, but I was shown how to go and move down to the earth world and visit my husband and daughter. Although that didn't happen instantly by any means. I was a bit of a mess at first and had to be, nursed around and brought out of my funk, she said. We're drinking tea that she produced and little cakes. Some, I asked her if she was aware that because of the internet and digital storage facilities that a lot of her music is still enjoyed here on Earth today. And she said yes, that she knew that and was very pleased that such a thing could be done now. And quite pleased with the Fotheringay box set, she said. And and the Fairport Convention live box set. She said we sang many more songs on the radio and on stage that didn't make it to albums, so she was pleased that got preserved. And she says then, of course, Trevor did arrive here some years after, a goodly number of years after her, but it didn't seem that long. And they're very close now, she said. I'm not sure that they live together. I didn't pursue that, but certainly good close friends and musical colleagues. Yes, we do play together, she said. Trevor's still a great guitar player and singer, um, and I love singing with him. And he is now, fully adapted to life here. His transition has been completed. She seems to think it has, anyway. And I asked about Nick Drake, and she said yes, that she had sought him out, and he's still Nick Drake, she said, still writing beautiful songs, and she has harmonized with him on a few ballads. And she compares their harmonies to some of the work she did in the early days with Ian Matthews. Those gentle, wilting harmonies from the early Fairport stuff. And I'm sure a number of fans will be very pleased to hear that, as was I. Although I did have a suspicion that she would meet up with Nick Drake. They weren't close friends, but they did play a number of gigs together, and she would be aware of his difficulties in not only in keeping his moods sort of stable, in troubles with depression, and he never really liked touring. So I think she sought him out and to encourage him. That's the feeling I got. She didn't make much mention of him, but she did make a point of mentioning him. There's no question. And I think she sort of dragged him to a couple of the places that she was singing at. He had passed just a few years before, just a couple of years before. As I say, I don't know if they were great friends, but they certainly knew each other as musicians and performers. And as some of you know, I did contact Nick Drake in a spirit contact a number of years ago. One of my early ones from 10 years ago or so. So there was that. And not the usual euphoria at being in spirit. She'd sort of acclimatized herself and maybe assumed that I knew all about it. I don't know. Some people are, and of course she's been there. 40 years, our time 40 years. So she's definitely used to it, and seems to be accustomed to going back to Earth, from time to time and visit, having a little ghostly visit with those that she loves and cares for. And it all seems very much in her lifestyle, an accepted part of her lifestyle. She seems to be past that sort of wild enthusiasm that some people feel, or a lot of people feel, when they get to the afterlife and realize how real and functioning it actually is. There's nothing, I don't want to say mystical, but once you get into the life there, it is quite a full and normal life in terms of humans and their existence and their desires and their ambitions and their loves and their fears and doubts, I guess. And she seemed to be well into that normal life. And I think she did use the phrase holiday in heaven a couple of times and sort of chuckled. And but didn't seem to sort of want it to end or come back to earth. She did mention that one of the things that she came back to see was when her initial group Fathering Gay with, I believe, the original drummer and guitar player, for sure, and maybe others, I didn't quite catch the whole thing, went out on tour again with two ladies singing her parts. And she said, I was very pleased with that, very thrilled to see that. And she said, if you can pass on my praise and love to those people. I said, oh, probably not. But I said, we'll put up the video on the internet and they might see it. Um, that was a couple of years ago. The Father and Gay Band did tour again, and some of it's up on YouTube, 2015, and some lovely music came out of those performances, no question. Until I believe the guitar player Jerry Donahue had a medical issue and they had to stop touring. Whether they started again, I don't know. I don't think he passed. But that's the issue with these people from that time period. They go back out on tour in their 70s, and unless they're careful, they overstretch themselves, push themselves a little too hard. So yeah, she did want to say that she'd been observing some of those gigs, and was mighty pleased with what she saw, and grateful. I think she said that the tradition was being continued. As were the fans. We were all quite thrilled with that, and she said something about loving to be able to control her weight. I think she was a little chunky on Earth, and was always, annoyed at all these slim and sexy young singers that they might have to compete with. I had thought that she was more musicianly than that, but I guess there's an element of that when you're not the acceptably glamorous shape when you're a performer. I'm sure the guys feel it too. And she said some technical things about her voice. She said her voice is so much purer and without fault when she's in spirit. And it took her a long while to get used to that. The sort of in the area of technical musicianly achievement, she said it's and then she sort of acknowledged that nerves didn't play so much of a role. She was terribly nervous, even though she was a fine performer, and gave some marvelous performances that were recorded. Only a couple on video, but many on audio that show just what she is capable of, and many stories of pre-performance nerves. And I can recall a couple of comments from the book saying, people would say, we had to push her out on stage, and then she gave a marvelous, transcendent performance, but we still had to push her out to begin with. And so she seems to have overcome that, and perhaps just by doing a small cafe, coffee house style performances has aided her in that. I didn't hear any talk about large concerts, although that doesn't mean there wasn't any. She may not have thought to mention it, and I may not have thought to ask. I tended to be receptive rather than provocative. I don't go up there with a list of questions. I wanted enough questions to open her up and let her, speak freely. And she was a little quite chatty, quite sort of thrilled I'd come to see her. Perhaps the more famous people that have passed on are a little blasé about getting the attention. And she certainly wasn't. Girlish, I would say, in some ways. Girlish and excitable. And I did ask her about composing music, and she said yes, she had. There's so many wonderful things about the world that she now lives in that she quickly began trying to compose music and lyrics that were appropriate to the experience, trying to convey the joy and wonder of being a spirit in a beautiful paradise world. She said something about on Earth I would try to evoke the feeling of flying in one's imagination. flying through landscapes and forests and river valleys. And she says, no, I can just do it. I don't have to imagine it. I can just do it and then write about it. I mentioned to her my love for her late song on her last album called All Our Days, which is a ballad with orchestra, which is really quite marvelously beautiful. And she said, oh, thank you. She said, I still sing that now, but with a slightly different attitude. It's a song that embraces one's experience of life in a very praising, almost devotional kind of way. I wouldn't say it's hymn-like exactly, but almost rhapsodic. And it's just her and an orchestra. It's quite marvelous. And it's not recognized as much as it should be, I don't think. And she said, oh, I've met Harry. And Harry Robinson, that was who she was referring to as the orchestrator, longtime orchestrator, who did many many albums and some film soundtracks, I believe, and had this ability to give a rich, deep, sort of thick orchestration, especially of the strings, similar to Maurice Ravel. And he's the one that orchestrated several the famous Nick Drake ballads too, and is well loved and remembered by those who love Nick Drake and Sandy Denny's music. If you listen to Nick Drake's Riverman, for example, his orchestration is part and parcel of the magical experience of the song. You can't imagine it without it. Well, I mean, you can, but it's just not as great. And so she sort of said when I asked, oh, yes, I've been to visit Harry. He's lived a long life and passed, not quite sure when, after her, but not quite sure when. And had been an orchestrator and arranger for many decades, I believe. And I don't know how well she knew him on Earth, or if he was just sort of contracted by the record producers to put orchestras on. I'm not quite sure on that one. But I don't know if she's done any work with him. Certainly doing work with orchestras is easier in the spirit world because you don't have to pay for 60 people or whatever, 30, 40, 60 people. There's a cost to that. And there's certainly plenty of deceased orchestral musicians, in orchestras and small chamber groups over there. I may not have spoken much about that, but it's there, believe me. So a small note, just another person that she met and was happy to be with. And she asked what brought me to see her, and I said, oh, just love of your music. And I was a young man when you started to become well known in Britain, and I was very enamored of the early Fairport and Fotheringay records. And she said, oh, she was quite pleased to hear that. And said, oh, you'll have to come and hear me sing sometime here. And I said, I will do that. Although I didn't, not last night I didn't, but I think she's still kind of pleased at the notion that people would come from this world, living people, to hear her sing. Maybe not that many have done it so far, I'm not quite sure, or she might not be aware. I don't know. Most people in spirit are aware of who's a permanent resident and who's a nighttime visitor. There's a slight difference in the aura and the radiance. Now, whether everyone can tell that, it seems like almost everyone can, but when she's maybe up on stage and totally, wrapped up in her performances, and she is one of those types of performers, she might not be aware of that, or not choose to be aware of it. she asked me what kind of music I like to listen to now, and I told her all the classic stuff, classic jazz, classic rock, lots of classical, um, folk groups. She said, who do you listen to now? And um, I said, there's a group attaining prominence in that world called Fleet Foxes. I said, they sing very well together. And she took note of the name. And it was all I could think of right off the top of my head in terms of new people doing folky type music. And it was interesting that she asked. Because, as I say, she was quite charmed with having someone come to visit her and talk to her. Not someone from here, not. She leads a full life and a happy life and a productive life. And although there was, I say, brief mentions of her transition period, which were troubled, sad, depressed, and she needed to get her act together. Did I say that already? She did sort of say that. And I did ask if she had any notion of her past lives. And she said, yes, when I sing those sad ballads, I get images of the past lives that inspired some of the feelings. And I said, what, including Banks of the Nile? And she said, yeah, similar things. Banks of the Nile is about a woman lamenting her lover going off to war to fight Napoleon in Egypt of the British Army, and dressing up as a man so that she can go with him. And quite a touching song. So, yeah, I often wondered about people singing traditional ballads that go back hundreds of years. Do they evoke episodes in their own past lives? And that was her answer, yes. Glimpses, visions as she's singing of past lives that would be similar to things that she would be singing about in these traditional ballads. I'm not sure she's explored them in any great detail, but she's at the stage of having intimations and visions of them. And she asked again if I was going to put this up on the internet. I said, yes, it'll be up there fairly soon. And she seemed quite pleased about that. And said, oh, that'd be marvelous, she said. And I said, well, I don't get a lot of people watching my videos, but, couple of hundred might know, and the word might get out. I don't know. As many of you know, when I do things, some of the spirit contacts do get hundreds and hundreds of hits, and others don't get that many. And it seems to depend almost entirely on the degree of celebrity that the person had when here. And that's is as it is, I guess. You can also take the view that those who need to see it will see it. And I hope you're one of them. Well, you must be. Anyway, I'm sure I did other things last night, but I didn't order my mind enough to tell you about it right now, and we're sort of running out of time here. But this is OBEJournal 2018 number 1, and we'll continue on either tomorrow morning or very soon. And I wish you well in all your own explorations and lucid dreams and remembered lucid dreams. Many of you are out there traveling every night and remembering some of it. And I certainly encourage you to remember more. And as you uncover more, you will discover the deeper and greater being that you are. And I think all of you have intimations of this, but you have your doubts to overcome, and you will, as you loosen the reins on your blinkers, you know, looking straight ahead at this dimension, taking the blinkers off and feeling and seeing the other dimensions. It can be a little scary. I don't blame you for taking your time doing it, but that is what you're doing. You're slowly taking the blinkers off and allowing yourself to see the dimensions, the many dimensions that you live in. This little imprisonment in 3 dimensions, it's just an exercise. That's all it is. It isn't much more important than that. And really regaining your multidimensionality is a triumph of one who is trapped and frees themselves. And then after that, you help free others. That seems to be what it's all about. Freeing yourself and then helping others free themselves. And with that grand and marvelous thought, I shall leave you, friends. So long.